LandSpace is one of China's hottest aerospace companies, and this reputation is not without good reason. Often called the SpaceX of China, they're a company who's already launched, although unsuccessfully, an orbital-class rocket, who've developed 2 Methalox engines, and plan to have their rocket flying by the end of the year, with reusability soon to follow. They're one of the most exciting rocket launch startups on either side of the Pacific, and in today's video, I want to do a deep dive on them, starting with how they were founded. They were founded in 2015, right after the relaxation of rules that allowed the space industry in China to flourish. Much like in America, they were founded by government contractors and government employees of the rocket launch monopoly in China that were dissatisfied with the monotony of their jobs and wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible. And so they did. In only 3 years after LandSpace's founding, it prepared for the launch of its first rocket, the Zhuque-1. It's a 3-stage solid propellant rocket that's able to take 300 kilograms into a 300-kilometer low Earth orbit. Its 3 stages are likely based off the DF-26 missile used by the PLA, and you'll see a lot of similarities to the rocket iSpace used, the Hyperbola 1, to eventually become the first private space company to reach orbit. But on the 27th of October 2018, the Zhuque rocket launched by LandSpace was the first privately developed Chinese rocket to take off. The flight proceeded smoothly with the first stage burning out, and then the second stage starting, burning out, payload fairing jettison, but the third stage had guidance issues that prevented the payload from reaching orbit, thus the flight was a failure. Even though the company could have easily proceeded development on the Zhuque-1 and turned it into a probably reliable launch vehicle, instead they decided to pursue liquid rocket engines and a methane-based design with a focus on reusability. After all, reusing SRBs isn't nearly as efficient as reusing and landing rockets. Therefore, they began development on the Zhuque-2 Rocket, a medium-class launcher with a lifting thrust of 268 tons, whose first stage is powered by 4 Zhuque-12 or TQ-12 Methalox engines, and whose second stage is equipped with a single vacuum version of the TQ-12 combined with the 10-ton, also Methalox 4-chambered engine TQ-11, which is going to be used as a Vernier engine on the second stage and also power the third stage of the optional ZQ-12A variant, which is a 3-stage variant that includes the addition of the aforementioned TQ-11 powered third stage. LandSpace also says that they have the capability of creating a ZQ-2 Heavy and ZQ-2 Super Heavy by essentially using the first stage as a strap-on booster similar to the Falcon Heavy, creating the ZQ-2B and ZQ-2C variants. All those acronyms don't really roll off the tongue, but in the end they look like they're going to be pretty capable rockets, with geostationary transfer orbit payloads of 2.4, 6.7, and 14 tons for the ZQ-2A, 2B, and 2C respectively. This stacks up with the 5.5 ton payload when the Falcon 9 lands on a drone ship, and the 8.3 ton when the Falcon 9 full thrust is expended, which it doesn't plan on doing anytime soon. It's important to note whether these numbers are for the reused variant of the ZQ-2 or not, because the rocket will begin flight as an expendable rocket and then later transition to reusability, which I think is a great idea. It'll allow them to get their product to market as soon as possible, and since they've just recently acquired another factory to build their rockets, added on already to their huge manufacturing space in the Shanghai area, and R&D centers in Xi'an in inland China and Beijing. This adds on to other smart engineering design decisions, like making the TQ-12A gas generator cycle engine versus more complicated cycles like the full-flow staged combustion one. Frankly put, the engineering behind a full-flow staged combustion engine is super complicated, and they still managed to get 350 seconds of impulse in a vacuum with their TQ-12 vacuum variant. So they're not really cutting on performance either way. And have I mentioned that just their manufacturing center in Huzhou in the Shanghai area can pump out 200 rocket engines and 15 rockets in a year? It's crazy. And the fact that they've already put thought into scaling up shows really good business savvy, which is another thing that impresses me about LandSpace. They've had no problem fundraising even though their only launch has been a failure. In fact, just 1 month after that failure, they managed to raise $41.8 million in a B+ series funding round. In further fundraising rounds in 2020, they raised $175 million, and in total they've raised $380 million of private investment from top Chinese capital firms over 9 to 10 rounds. They're very well capitalized, and they're showing it in the kind of talent they're bringing in and the factories they're building and buying up. In fact, they've also signed deals with foreign companies. UK-based Open Cosmos and Italy-based D-Orbit have both signed deals worth a value of around $13.9 million to launch their CubeSats. That's a big deal in a Chinese launch industry that's largely insulated from the outside world. Combine this with China and the world's interest in mega constellations and satellite constellations of all shapes and sizes, I think LandSpace is coming at a pretty good time to fulfill a really good niche in the market. And considering their launcher is actually fairly well sized, with a payload capacity of 4 tons to low Earth orbit, and plans to scale up to launchers that could rival the Falcon 9 through adding strap-on boosters, I can see a real path for LandSpace to not just become a competitor in the Chinese launch industry, but in the global launch industry. If you think about it, past SpaceX in the American launch industry, the only other companies to announce solid and concrete plans for creating a reusable rocket have been Rocket Lab and Relativity, and their designs are both planned to be completed in 2024. While LandSpace has already got Zhuque-2 being built, with the TQ-12 and TQ-11 engines having both completed extensive tests well and beyond of their duty cycles lasting thousands of seconds, being some of the most tested Methalox engines outside of the Raptor. And they plan on launching the Zhuque-2 in 2021. So when you add up all of these factors, the business savvy, the engineering decisions, and the fact that they've got a rocket basically built, I mean, LandSpace has a really compelling business and engineering case, and I can see them dominating the Chinese market in the same way that SpaceX has largely dominated the US one. And it's really important to say just how much of an impact SpaceX has had on these new space Chinese companies. I mean, the chief marketing officer of LandSpace mentioned in an interview with Dongfang Hour that the point-to-point capability of Starship was something he'd very much like to imitate with the ZQ-2 and further on rockets. And of course, the decision to use methane itself leaned heavily on SpaceX's frustration with RP-1 coking that led them to develop the Raptor engine for Starship. I'll be honest, the biggest issue I can find with them is that the path to reusability is a little shakier than the other Chinese startups. iSpace plans on doing hops with their Hyperbola 2 launch vehicle, and LinkSpace has been doing hops with ever-increasing sizes of rocket since 2016. But the use of subcooled methane, yeah, that's right, they're gonna subcool their methane just like SpaceX to get the maximum performance and density out of it, really indicates to me they're gonna take reusability seriously. I think the only thing in question right now is the timeline on which they plan to do that, but even if it's 2024 or even a little later than that, I think if they can just get Zhuque-2 flying, they're gonna have a pretty good time of it, and I wish them the best of luck. Thank you to anyone who's still watching right now, and if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. I'm Cosplus Content, signing off.